Hello and welcome to another episode of From the Desk of Jamison Greenwood, produced by NJB Enterprises and broadcasting from the Kactus, KCTS, here in Phoenix, Arizona. Tonight we'll go on a little fishing trip as I tell you about the time I fished for some salmon in an artificial lake in the middle of the suburbs. As usual, we'll have our quiz, but instead of the poem, I want to talk a little bit about the election ahead of us, but we'll have more on that later. But we'll begin as usual with the answers to last week's trivia quiz, and our three categories were the Bible, children's television, and current political issues. And the first question, who, according to the Old Testament, was swallowed by a whale? The correct answer was D, Jonah, or B, as I said B on accident even though I meant to say D on the show last week. Anyhow, after Jonah refused God's request to deliver a message to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, he fled Israel by boat and was swallowed by a whale. But when he prayed and agreed to go to Nineveh if God gave him a second chance, he was released, and thus he did go to Nineveh to give God's message. Now the second question, the Children's Corner on WQED was a precursor to which PBS Kids show? The correct answer was A, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred Rogers was one of the founding members of PBS station WQED in Pittsburgh, and with an actress named Josie Carey, he created the Children's Corner, which was their first regular show. And it also featured many of the puppets and settings that would later be featured in the Neighborhood of Make-Believe segments on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now the final question, what is Arizona's Proposition 205 about? The correct answer is D, legalization of medical marijuana. It wouldn't be willy-nilly, though. It would be regulated like alcohol so that anyone could buy from a certified dispensary, but they'd have to be over 21 like alcohol is the legal drinking age. Now, there was a pattern this week. The letters for the correct answers were D, A, D, Dad. And we'll have a new quiz later on in the show, but now it's time to spin another yarn. There is some yarn involved in this story, so at least I'm not using that expression in vain. There was a time when I was a kid when we had dinner at Red Lobster almost every Wednesday night. I don't know where this tradition got started or why it ended, but every Wednesday when my dad got home from his job working at the reptile house at the zoo, and my mom got home from her accounting job, we would pile into our Mercury Grand Marquis, drive out to the Desert Sky, formerly known as West Ridge, shopping mall, at 75th Avenue and Thomas Road, and have our dinner at Red Lobster. Now, normally I enjoyed this traditional meal where I would not have seafood, but instead some chicken tenders and fries from off of the kids' menu. But one night I got bored of these, and I couldn't think of anything else to order, so I asked my mom for a suggestion. "Mom, what do you think I should get?" "How about some salmon and asparagus?" she suggested before taking a sip of her Diet Coke. "It's good for you." "Okay, I guess." I'd always enjoyed asparagus when Mom made it at home, so that part of the meal was a treat, but the salmon was so dry that it was barely edible, and I was only able to get through half of it. On the way home, I told them how I felt, and my dad said, "Fish tastes better when it's fresh caught. That stuff was probably frozen solid." At the time this was going on, I had been reading The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. That night, when I went to bed, before I went to bed, actually, you don't read while you're sleeping, I got to the chapter where Tom, Huck, and Joe go fishing in the spring on Jackson's Island. "That's it," I said. "I'll try to catch my own salmon." So I set about a plan and gathered supplies for a little fishing excursion the next Wednesday. I prepared for my excursion the rest of that week. On Friday, when we went to Circle K to get snacks, I bought a bag of gummy worms, and although I did eat a few, I admit, I put most of them in my nightstand drawer to use as bait. Then I went to make a fishing pole. I went into our garage where I thought I might be able to find some sort of stick. There were some wooden dowels in a tub in the garage which I thought at first might work, but upon finding a piece of PVC pipe, I decided that that would work better being that it was hollow and would allow me to reel in easier with my string. I also got a brass screw-in hook out of a drawer in the garage before I went back upstairs to store these things. Then I came back downstairs to go through my mother's sewing basket to find some suitable twine. Now, unfortunately, the best thing I found at first was a pastel-colored yarn with pink and yellow and blue, but I thought that that was too girly, so I kept digging through to find some better color. Unfortunately, the best thing I found was a bolt of bright red yarn, but then I thought, well, that might attract the fish, so it actually seemed like a good idea. Now, I wasn't sure how much yarn I was going to need, so I went upstairs and devised a specific method to measure it. I put the bolt of yarn on a table between the bathroom and my parents' bedroom, and I sandwiched it between a copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and David McCullough's biography of John Adams to hold it in place. I then took the string and went up and down the stairs 5 or 6 times, pulling the string behind me, wrapping it at a rail at the bottom until what I thought was enough had covered the stairs. Mom might be upset I took so much of her yarn, I thought, but it would be better to have too much yarn as opposed to not enough. I put all of my fishing supplies into the closet until next Wednesday, when I gathered it all into my red wagon along with a lawn chair. Then I went into the kitchen to tell Mom where I was going. "Why do you want to go fishing?" she asked. "Well, I want to see if I can find some better salmon than what we had at Red Lobster the other night." "Well, where are you going to go fish?" she asked. "The Stucco Gardens Lake." She frowned. This seemed unsafe to her. "I'll be extra careful," I begged of her. "Okay," she sighed, "but be back by 5:15, and if you don't catch anything, we're going to Red Lobster anyway." "Okay, I'm off." I grabbed the wagon and walked out through the garage. I walked first to the end of Burnt Sienna Lane, then walked a block south onto Stucco Gardens Boulevard until I got to Stucco Gardens Lake Park. I crossed at the corner of Stucco Gardens Boulevard and Osborne, then walked over to the park. Now, Stucco Gardens Lake Park was in the southern middle part of the Stucco Gardens, which was the housing development that we lived in. Now, the actual park itself was at the south end of the area, and it was a whole bunch of, green St. Augustine grass, and there were a whole bunch of silk oak trees that would provide a nice shade during the hot Arizona summers. And then the actual lake that it was named after was on the north side of the park, but it was an artificial lake that had little fountain sprayers that would come on in the middle. And some of the homes bordering the outside of the lake had their own docks, and in some cases their own boats. I set up my chair under what I deemed to be a perfect pair of silk oak trees where no sun shone at all, and thus it was nice and cool. I took the long piece of yarn out of the plastic bag I had put it in and fed it through the PVC until I found it at the other end. Then I tied a knot around the brass hook and poked a red and orange striped gummy worm onto the end of it. Then I prepared to cast my bait and wait. I wasn't quite sure how to go about doing this, so I paced back and forth between the 2 oak trees for about 2 minutes, pondering what I should do until I came up with a method that I thought would work. I measured the hooked end of the yarn so that it was the same length as the piece of pipe. Then I lifted the pipe off the ground. I stood so that I was far enough from both trees that it wouldn't get caught in the branches, and glanced around to ensure that I wouldn't hook any people or animals on accident. Then I thrust the pole forward, and the yarn cast off into the lake. Unfortunately, I had not properly ensured that the other end of the yarn was secure, so instead of having some left for me to grasp, the whole piece of yarn flew right out of the pipe and into the water, and thus was beyond usefulness as an actual fishing line. I tried a couple times to fish it out with the PVC, but it was no use because the pipe was too short and the yarn was too far away. So defeated, I gathered what I had left into my wagon, walked back home onto Burnt Sienna, and I sat through a plate of chicken tenders at Red Lobster again. But I wasn't ready to give up, and I told my parents that I intended to return next week with a whole load of fish. And that's when things began to get interesting. Before I tell you about that, though, we have to take a short break, but we'll have all kinds of great stuff for you when we come back. You are listening to From the Desk of Jamison Greenwood on KCTS.
Every time I go out to your place, you gone fishing.
How you know?
But there's a sign upon your door.
Uh-huh.
Gone fishing.
I'm real gone, man.
You ain't working anymore.
If you had chickenpox, the shingles virus is already inside you. 1 in 3 people will get shingles in their lifetime. Don't leave yourself unprotected. Ask your doctor about the new hailstorm shingles prevention vaccine. It's neither covered by insurance nor FDA approved, but it's guaranteed to kill shingles like hailstorms kill your roof. Hailstorm is not for everyone, like people with liver disease and women who are nursing, pregnant, or may become pregnant. Simple blood tests will check for liver problems. Ask your doctor if the hailstorm vaccine is right for you. And if he says no, hold him hostage with threat of lethal force until he says yes.